So I'm going to turn it over to Jim at this point, and
Sure. Well, thank you for the introduction. As I'm discussed with Dan and Grant before this talk, I think unfortunately most people think of estate planning as something that only relatively affluent people need to do. It's all about saving taxes, et cetera, et cetera. When I started doing this in 1977, that was largely true. The tax on estates was, relatively speaking, very high, and the threshold was very low. So almost everybody who had accumulated anything had to deal with estate tax. Flash forward to today, and you may have read this or know of it already. A married couple can leave up to $26 million tax-free to their children, anybody, and that we're down to something like 3%, 2% of the people who die have a tax issue. So the typical client that I meet is under the $26 million threshold. So taxes are not driving the bus. You don't sit around and talk, well, we can set up this trust and do all these things to avoid taxation. But what has changed, at least from my perspective, is the complexity of life. It is not unusual for people to be married 2 or 3 times, have children by different partners, some adopted, some quote natural. Children don't always marry the people you would prefer that they marry, and therefore you deal with son-in-laws or daughter-in-laws that you're not necessarily enamored of. You deal with handicaps. Dan mentioned in his introduction, I have 2 adult children with autism. And one of the realities of life is 75, 80% of autistic adults live at home, their parents' home. And they've done it since they were born. Well, at some point, unfortunately, parents die or are unable to care. And then the question is, well, who kind of helps them? Who takes care of them? And people assume that siblings will step up. That is not always the case. I can tell you firsthand. Siblings say, I love my brother or I love my sister, but I have my own complexity of life. I cannot be their caretaker. And then the question, well, who else is going to volunteer for that job? The answer is nobody. So you have this, I don't know whether it's larger or simply more recognized group of dependents who carry with them emotional and sometimes financial baggage. And then going the other side, you have people who are taking care of their parents, who are now in their 90s. When I first began doing estate law, the insurance tables for, at what age, so forth, ended at 80. It was assumed that you'd all be dead by 80. And now they go up to 100. And my mother is 99, but I'm sure we all know people. You said, my friend Sarah, she's 94. I mean, it's not an aberration anymore to have people who live a long, long time, but still may need care of different kinds. Sometimes it's financial, more often it's guardianship or conservatorship and so on. So all this is illustrative that when I sit down with people to talk about a will, the tax discussion takes about 32 seconds. And they tell me they've accumulated X. I say, well, the good news, there'll be no tax. And they say, oh, that's good news, that's good news. And then I have them sort of walk through their lives. What's going on? What are you doing? Children, no children. Dan mentioned earlier that his son, has no children, has no plans to have children, but has a girlfriend to whom he is not married. How does she fit into the puzzle? And then the other thing that I've seen lately is people, they may have 2 children, 3 children, and then they say, are they all equal? Well, it's obviously intuitive to say each child will get a third, or 50-50, whatever it is. but that doesn't necessarily recognize that, they're in different places. Some children are making lots of money, financially secure. Do you treat them the same as someone who is financially struggling? So I view a will or estate planning as not merely filling out some documents. That I think is the easiest part. To do a power of attorney and do a medical directive. I mean, all those can be done almost filling in the blanks with a few exceptions. But the real question is these things that have nothing to do with taxation, but they deal with life. How are you going to deal? It's almost like a decision tree. What if the son predeceases his spouse? What if grandchildren have an issue? So forth. And the discipline that I think an estate planner can give, should give, is to walk through these problems or potential problems. And one of the things that unfortunately is true is people don't want to deal with it. They don't. I mean, there are some exceptions, but most people don't want to deal with the possibility that my brother will outlive, the autistic brother will outlive my parents, and what do I do? And so forth. So you need to be sort of a gentle nudge. You need to say you can't just punt on that. And it's not, again, as I said a moment ago, it's not about money as such. It is who will make certain that the things that are important to me get addressed post-death. And it's not the obvious choice. For example, used to be with guardianships. People say, well, if I die, my children are under 18, my parents will take care of the kids. That has almost disappeared in my practice because people have children later. Parents are now in their 60s, 70s, even older. And when people have a discussion about who will be a guardian for my kids, it's not smart, basically, for your 74-year-old dad to be watching a 9-year-old. I mean, it's possible and doable, but so who are the candidates? And it's sometimes a sibling, but more often these days it's friends. And you say, well, that's a hell of a friend who will take care of your kids. But if there's money there, or at least enough money to take care of the children, what you're really looking for the friend to do is to be the surrogate parent without any financial burden. And again, that's just another example of the kind of things that people don't really address. And they just go to the default. My parents are doing it. And again, that works fine if your parents are 52, not so good if they're 72. And so when I construct the will, I have an interview with the people. I try and do in person. Some prefer Zoom or an alternative. But at that meeting, I push a bit on this and go through the what ifs with people. And then when I am done, I say, I'm going to send you draft documents. And the draft documents, I think the most important part of the will, it's true of the other documents, is a preamble. And in the preamble, you set the stage. I'm on my 5th marriage. I have children by these people. I have and no one is terminated anymore. An illegitimate child. I have this. Someone has a problem. My son can't hold a job. Whatever the story is, so that anyone reading the will has context. Why did you do this? And the answer is, I've set the stage. I've told the story. And one recent case, a couple had a daughter who married a fellow that they viewed as completely worthless, did not work, sponged off the daughter, not abusive in a physical sense, but disinterested in the daughter. And so they did not want him to have any role in whatever, and they've accumulated a fair amount of money, what they leave her. So if you simply said in the will, it's all going to the daughter, it doesn't tell you anything. So you have to say, because of past issues, you have to sit and say, why don't they trust the son-in-law? And without going on for pages, you say, he has not been a productive worker, he's not supported the family, and so forth. So if down the road there were a challenge to the will, people know why you treat the son-in-law different than the daughter, etc. But anyway, I get this done. They come back, a second meeting, and that's when now that they've seen the roadmap, do they change things? And they do. They say, well, okay, we fiddle, we get it done. And one of the things I've learned, it only happened to me twice, but it was frightening, is people delay. And then you get a call, Jim, I'm having heart surgery tomorrow. I need to finalize the will. And you rush it over there. And twice people have died before they got the document signed. So one of the messages is, I think it's pretty good. Maybe it's 94% right. Let's sign it. Better than not having it. And then if you need to tinker with it, I'll do it's called a council, it's just an amendment. And I'll make the changes, no extra charge. So it gets people over the hump. But, and then just on more routine things other than death, the other two documents, in addition to a will, that people typically do, you probably know, is a power of attorney and a medical directive. And the medical directive, essentially, because we're all trapped by guilt. I'm sure you've heard it, where you go to the hospital and you have your 9-year-old son and you say, well, what's wrong? I can't tell you, it's HIPAA and so forth. So you do the medical directive, which says, in effect, you can trust Dan, you can tell him anything. And what is fascinating to me is that there are hospitals that won't even kind of let you in the room unless you have a medical power of attorney or medical directive, and others pay no attention at all. But I've had to go into emergency rooms and get documents signed because the hospital wouldn't tell the spouse or the adult children what was going on. And the other document that people get is this power of attorney, and of course that deals with it while you're alive. You have a stroke, you have a heart attack, you can't handle your affairs, or at least with some doubt, and you entrust someone to, deal with that. And again, it's not always the obvious person. You say, well, my spouse, that's my spouse, the power of attorney. But in some instances, the spouse is clueless about what has gone on financially. So maybe it's a child, maybe it's a best friend. But again, the point of the story is rather than worry about whether the documents are perfect, the question is, do they fit your situation? Are they consistent with things that are important to you? And so when people say, should a young person have a will? Well, again, it's not because of taxes, and they may not even have children yet if they're ever going to have children. But they have things going on in their life. They have a romantic relationship. They may have a sibling that has, as I've said several times, an issue. How do the pieces fit for that individual, during that time? And the other thing which sounds so obvious is wills are good until you write a replacement will. So I've had clients that do a will in 2024. And 3 years later, we'll come back and say, things have changed here. And we do either a new will or an amendment, but rather than because the other extreme is in the last year, at least 8 people have come in with wills and trusts and so forth that they did more than 20 years. And none of it is relevant to the lifetime. Their kids were 4 then, they're now adults, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, we have the wills, we just, needed to quote update it. Well, they update subsumes or consumes the old document, right? Everything has changed. And the thing that made sense in, 2004 doesn't fit the world we live in now. Not so much the law, but the changes that come with life. So So my advice to people about estate planning, I mean, we probably all get your postcards, come to Ruth Chris, get a great dinner, and we'll talk about estate planning. That's fine. It's better than not doing it. But I think the goal should be, if possible, to find someone who is not trying to put you into one of two or three boxes, but is willing to individualize the documents to fit your situation. Switching topics just slightly, I talked to Brad, before the meeting, and we talked a little bit about planned giving, whether it's to friends or any other group. When I began to, I'm a tax lawyer, and when I began doing audit work, the IRS published their audit manual, which was illustrative, told you what are the things they look for when they audit a tax return. And a rule of thumb at that time was if people gave up to 3% of their annual income to charity, that was quote normal. It didn't, it wasn't an audit item. But if they gave 22%, then it was an auditable thing, because they had done studies and the average or the mean was 3%. Flash forward now, when I do audit work, I would say even wealthy people, it's not a question of how much money you have. It is a view of charitable giving, and the fact is it's way under 30%. I mean, way under. Most people give, at least in my experience, at no more than 1.2% of their income. Why is that? Are people less charitable? Maybe, but I think it's really, it's not on their radar screen. And even with employers who do a matching program, and everybody gets, a zillion things from Shriners or St. Jude's and, but why don't people give more? And I think it's not a question of being cheap. I think it's a question of, is it important to you? Maybe it isn't. You say, I've got a lot of demands on my resources. The charity is not that important, but I do think, that it can and should be, and it's still really the only tax deduction which is unlimited. As compared to, interest deduction on your mortgage or state and local income tax, all of them are capped in various ways, except for charities. If you can give as little or as much as you want, and it's all permissible, and you've all heard the term 501c3, and that's a good measuring point, because the IRS doesn't just stamp it. You have to go through this 5-month process to prove that your group, your organization is a 501c3, and if you don't adhere to the rules, they pull it. So it's not an endorsement, but at least it tells you that someone has scrutinized that organization and determined that they're not pilfering money. It's not a fraud scheme or whatever. So
Has the fact that the standard deduction now increased and sort of taken away the advantage of itemizing, do you think that had an effect?
I do. The standard deduction keeps going up. And therefore, if the only motivation or the primary motivation was for charitable giving was the tax deductibility of it, and the deduction is no longer valuable to you because you file with a standard deduction, not surprising, there's a certain group of people who don't give in those circumstances. But I think it's not an education thing. Everyone's smart enough to know what charities do and don't do. But the autism group that I have a role in, there's a number of outside groups, and one's called Charity Navigator. And there's nothing, but they go through you have to file all sorts of stuff with them. But they basically show that out of each dollar, 84% goes to the goal and only 16 cents goes to the overhead. And I think that is reassuring to people that it doesn't go into just as. Well, I trust my father was a supporter of the March of Dimes, which made me, and that was, little kids would get this book and they fill in the dimes, and when it got to $5, it turned it in, and it was aimed at polio, the cure for polio. Well, it worked. I mean, it was one of the few charities that could hold a party and say mission accomplished. Polio, with a few exceptions, had been eradicated in the US. And part of that was through the funding of march funds. So my father said they should have had a big party and said, no, we all did great work. But they created this labyrinth of bureaucracy. So they changed their purpose to birth defects. Still an important thing, but you're never going to eliminate it. Basically, gave them positions in perpetuity because there would never be a moment where people said, we took care of all the birth defects. They're gone forever. So I've blathered for a while. Are there any thoughts, questions I can address for anybody?
What, the internet is full of fill in the form kind of things. There's a group called Free Will, so forth. Do you have any views on those?
They're fine with a but. The fine part is they're lawful. I've seen them, admitted to probate and, they're kind of a little language gets a little awkward, but it accomplishes its goal. And if someone said to me tomorrow, am I better served to use one of the online wills or powers of attorney? Absolutely, better than not doing it, not even close. But again, they're forms, so like any other form, they fit most people's situation most of the time, but they don't deal with the nuances of my experience, real life, and they don't deal with the things that are hard. So if someone said, should I do this? Yes, but if you're going to spend something beyond free or $50, I think you're better served to get a more personalized document for documents.
How do you, let's see if I can ask a question which elicits not a commercial, which I'm confident will not drill. But how does an ordinary person, you go to the yellow pages and there's several pages of lawyers, and how should one go about finding somebody and knowing you can trust somebody? I mean, I think, your approach is extremely appealing and you're known quantity. So I would say, okay, when you go to Jim and feel confident about it, but what should we say to people about finding a lawyer?
Well, again, I'm a relic from a different era. I mean, my clients come from two sources. You could guess. One are referrals, did your will, you thought it went well, you sent other people my direction. But the other is there are always sites. Justia, they're all, and people send in, I need a will, my mother just died, and I respond to most of them. But that's not that's sort of just throwing your hat there and hoping to get someone good. There are, as you would guess, estate planning certifications and so on. But I think, again, the question is not whether people are competent to draw the documents. It's whether they'll invest enough time and energy with you to get it right. Because to some degree, if you go to most estate planning lawyers and say, what's the cost of your will for my spouse and me? $2,500. What does that include? And they try and fit in the package. That's how they do it. And I'm not second guessing it. I'm simply saying your back sense should go off a little bit if you feel you're being plugged into something that doesn't feel comfortable for you.
Could I add to that?
Sure.
I think that that's a really hard question on any kind, not only wills and estates, but any lawyer
Plumbers.
or plumber or doctor,
Yeah.
any professional services. And I think there are two criteria because I've done a lot. One is references from people I know and trust, and I think they have good judgment. References from people that I know. That's number one. Number two is my gut. When I go in, or even sometimes on the phone, and then you can tell on the phone. My brother, who is not mentally incompetent in the technical sense of the word, but in the practical lifetime sense, he screwed his whole life up, all of his life, and he's now 74 and in bad shape. But he had he slipped and fell. It was damaged his back badly in a fall business thing. Slipped on the moss on the step. Clear liability. He got some lawyer in Southfield, Michigan. He lives in Michigan, but in the northern part of Michigan. He got some lawyer whose business model was never do anything, just cut a deal with the other side, the insurance. And my brother sent me a draft deal, and the dollars were in the ballpark for, I think, but the settlement had to indemnify the insurance that was making this payment. And I couldn't believe it. So I intervened and I got involved and resolved it. But I asked him how he got it. He basically said, well, I talked to him on the phone and he was the cheapest guy. And look, it's like buying a car, you got to pay attention to it. I just left visiting him again, and he is now 74 years old and no money, and I'm struggling. What? There were four of us growing up. So I have three siblings. And the other two siblings and I are trying to figure out what can we do to help this guy who, and it's and our mother is still alive, 102, but not competent, she tell you anything you want to know about 1932, but lunch yesterday, not so much. So we're grappling with it right now. I just had this meeting. He gave me a file that thick of all the bills he has that he needs to have paid. And I don't know how to deal with it. So I think there are a lot of ways that lawyers can help in these life challenges. And they come up. One of my other sisters has a son who he's schizophrenic and he's got all kinds of issues. And she's taken care of, okay? She's got a plan. But my brother never made a plan.
Mhm.
To pivot a little, for those of us who expect we have a fair amount of time left, where I work, we're starting to get a lot of money from donor advised funds.
Mhm.
But I'm sort of wondering, like, is there like a particular threshold of personal wealth at which that becomes advisable to have?
Donor advised fund.
Right, rather than just writing a check.
I mean, there's no absolute number, of course, but the people I know who do that have at least $500,000 in liquid assets. But that's just rule of thumb. I mean, there's no magic to that. But I would think that if you use that as your sort of guidepost, you would be on the right side of the issue.
So, Financial Stewardship Committee here, which we two are the two co-clerks of it, has a vicious and pernicious interest in getting people to write us into their document. We are like the tech dogs, right? Put into your will. So
More like a parasite.
yeah. A worm you don't notice until it's.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thinking, you deal with a lot of people who put charitable contributions in their documents.
Correct. Mhm.
But from your experience, what attracts, there's probably obviously some people have some intense personal interest, as sounds as if you do, in a particular. Do you have any thoughts on what makes, what attracts people to think about it? Did they ever talk about why it is they're giving to A rather than B?
They do, and it's a little bit of a insight into what's been important in their lives. I mean, often it's a school or university that they attended, they've been active in it ever since. I had one fellow who was a retired Marine colonel, and there's something called the Marine Foundation. And that was something that he was passionate about, it was in his will, relatively significant part of his estate will go to that. I think if, not that you need my help, but if you're trying to sell to the membership, why should you give money to the friends? And, you know, you would both, hopefully in your lifetime, but also after death. I think you work backwards. And what's been important to you? What plays a role in your life? And sometimes it's unfortunately a traumatic event, but sometimes it's just, I had some people in who did not have children of their own, but had 2 dogs that they were passionate about. And so, in their will, a significant portion goes to various animal groups, dog focused groups, because that had been what was important to them. I think if you ask people, you know, there's no requirement, obviously you don't have to leave anything to a charity. But if you said to people, and I try and raise this, said, is there any nonprofit, I just use the broad word, that has been important to you? And the most common things, as you would guess, are a religious institution, a college or university, or if they have a passion for, in that case, the dogs, something that, you know, is important. But I think you have to ask the question, because I can tell you, if you look at the standard wills online, most of them don't even talk about a charitable request of any kind. Whether you're poor or you're rich, it's just not on the radar screen. It is assumed that people want all, not most, all of their assets to go to family members or, you know, related parties of various sorts. So I do think I'm passion's probably too strong a word. I find it fascinating. I still write probably 30 wills a year. And each one's got a little twist to it. But what I like about it, it causes people, because we're all, I'll speak for myself, we're all too busy, you know, with our lives, that we rarely sit down and reflect, where do I want to be in 5 years? How do I take care of my brother? What's the long-term plan? And the answer for most people is they know they have to address it, they just don't sit down to do it. And the will process, state planning process, with a third party, me in this case, sort of guiding it a little bit, but not guiding it to a particular end, but simply making sure that they've thought this through. While they're on, let me give you just one thing, which isn't really about law at all. In most marriages that I've been involved in as an estate planner, one person, wife, husband, doesn't matter, has done all the bill paying. Pays everything, knows where everything is. The other one, I won't say doesn't have a clue, but pretty close to doesn't have a clue. So I make people do what's called a roadmap. And what's that? It's not a legal document, be handwritten. It says, we bank with Truist. Our account number is so-and-so. You know, we keep our passports in the drawer under the kitchen sink. And you say, well, that's stupid. People should know that, but they don't. And so after someone dies, I've gone to houses that, let's just say, make those TV shows about hoarders seem a little more true than I thought they'd be. And no one has any idea where stuff is.
That's my dad's house.
My brother's house.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you say, well, how can they? But if they had done, as I said, we're not talking about a legal document. It's a handwritten thing, which I literally staple to the will. We have a safe. Most people choose to keep their wills with that. And so the basic information. And then the other thing, which is, I think important, but not everyone agrees with me, is once you figured out what you're gonna do, and you've written the will and you've signed it, who do you tell about it other than, let's say, your spouse? Do you sit the kids down and say, just so you know, we did this will, here's what's gonna happen when mom and I die, or whatever it may be? And it's called a family meeting. We probably stole it from the Quakers. But the fact is, it forces people to at least consider what the reaction is. And I've been at those family meetings. I'm not always present, but often I am. And you get some surprises. And again, talking about, say, your brother as an example, if you say in your will, I'm gonna leave my brother $100,000, but my sister's gonna be the trustee and blah, 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 blah. And you sit down and tell people and say, I don't wanna be his trustee. I don't wanna do that. You know, if you're willing to live $100,000, that's wonderful, Dan, but I don't wanna be the one who has to dole it out and deal with his bills and so forth. And you don't know that until you tell them. I had one husband and wife, unfortunately, that I wrote wills for, died in a car accident together. They had kids under 18, and they named her brother, the uncle, to be the guardian. So I remember being to my office, terrible news, they died in this car accident, let's talk about what needs to be done. He said, I'm not doing that. I'm not gonna raise these, I mean, the kids were relatively young, like 8 and 6. So it was gonna be a decade or more commitment. And again, it wasn't a financial thing, it was my life was completely different, now I have these 2 minor kids. He wouldn't do it, he just refused. And you can't make someone be a trustee, you can't make someone be a guardian, nor should you. So we had to find someone else, and it got solved, most problems get solved. But wouldn't it have been better in hindsight if his
We've had that
sister?
discussion before. I had that, my brother came to me and said, if we die, we want you to take care of our daughter, are you willing to do that before they wrote their will? And I think that's the kind of conversation.
Yeah, you have to have that.
People don't, I mean.
Yeah.
So I want to use an example from our own meeting.
Sure, please.
So one of the members of our meeting died in the last few years, and he'd left his house meeting. On his deathbed, his sister had come, who thought we were a bunch of pagans, and brought a lawyer and got him, while he was intoxicated on drugs and in hospice, to sign a document saying he was leaving the house to her. And we had to hire a lawyer, but if we didn't have a copy of the will,
You never would have known.
we would not have known that, one, that had been his intention, or known that this will that appeared out of nowhere, how it had occurred, and been able to fight it. And so, from my point of view, I mean, my experience is, my parents didn't give me a copy of their will. I didn't know anything about it nor did any of my siblings. And I think that family meeting idea, I think, is really crucial, and including third-party charities that you're including in the estate, so that they can fight. If one of my kids came along and got me to sign something to give everything to them, and they didn't know that I'd actually designated, you each get a quarter, and the other quarter is going some to big meetings, some to George Scholes, some to Wesley, whatever my, if those institutions don't know that I designated them, one of my kids could get away with something like this, or if I tried to get away with. I mean, I don't know whether you recommend that.
Oh, I recommend it, and I can also tell you that I know it doesn't constitute elder abuse, but I think of it as elder abuse when someone's old
Mhm.
and sometimes they're in step and sometimes they're not, and someone shoves a piece of paper in front of them and they sign it. I've had 2 cases where there are 3 or 4 children. One was doing the primary caretaking for mom. Both cases was a mom. They're doing the work. They have mom basically give them a disproportionate amount of the
Right.
estate. Now, they rationalize it. I don't know, these people are off, having vacation. I gotta deal with mom, I go with her to every doctor's appointment. I mean, it's not like they get up in the morning and say, I'm evil, I'm stealing money from my siblings. But
They had a sense of
justification,
yeah,
but again, to go to your point, if we'd had a family meeting while mom was still competent, we could at least discuss, does Sally get something extra for taking care of mom? I have no problem with that, to say it's a four-way split, except we pay Sally an extra 50 grand. Because she's done all the heavy lifting for the last, 5 years. And I think when people sign on, because I've been in meetings, and they hear it, real hard for them to disown it later. Everybody's there, everybody heard it, nobody said, hey, Sally doesn't get anything extra.
right.
So, one of the things that, go back to the charitable thing, that the business is, involvement and commitment, and so that if you are, just to take a random example, friends meeting in Washington, the more you can be involved in certain people's lives, and then gently remind them from time to time that we're an object of charity. Without being pushy about it, that probably enhances your chance of being remembered very well.
Well, I think that's true, and I also think before anybody dies, you say, look, we've got this, and you mentioned that the mortgage comes due in whatever year. It's a big nut. How are we gonna deal with it? We got some time, but we don't have forever. How do we get people to address that issue? Yeah, it's great if Jim Sack puts it as will, but if he dies in 2044, it's not terribly helpful if the mortgage is due in 2032 or whatever it is.
Right.
So and again, I think people can deal with complicated news. They can deal with stuff that isn't easy if they're asked in a way where they don't feel under the gun. If you say to people on a Tuesday, we need money by Friday or they're gonna foreclose, hard to deal with. If you say, we got a couple of years, here's the plan, we need to pay it down at X dollars a year, how do we get there? Who has to do what for us to do that? Are there some creative ways to do it? For the autism group, again, each group raises money in different ways. We had a bunch of people involved who were marathon runners. I was not one of them. It's hard to believe. And so we now have almost 1,000 people a year running different marathons.
Wow.
And each one was the same deal. We pay for the entry fee, which is usually about $200, $250. And they then go to their buddies, friends, and say, I'm running a marathon, I'm running the New York Marathon. Can you do it? And we raise roughly $1 million a year. And it's not that we're so brilliant at it. It's people view a marathon as a sufficiently big undertaking that they respect it and support it. That's not true of everything. We said, I'm gonna walk to the corner store where you pay me, $1 per mile. Probably doesn't work as well, but
Right.
So we have a question online.
sure.
The
Oh,
question out?
yes, thank you. I I'm not sure if this is a question or really more of a comment, but I just wanted to say that, especially as I've been hearing you talk about how, creating these documents and, working with a lawyer involves some of the, weightiest questions that a person will ever address, and the, potentially sort of quite distressing issues if, family members are, needing to be cared for in the future and so on and so forth. And anyway, I was going to say that I, as personally, find decision making, somewhat difficult. And part of the reason that I'm attracted to the idea of giving to the meeting is that in a way, the decisions are gonna then be made for me by the meeting, which is just, what I mean is, I don't have to decide whether my charitable giving is gonna go to an arts organization or a food bank or a, cancer research or, one thing. It's not going to be an either or for me. If I give to the meeting, I know the meeting is going to support all these different types of work, not, maybe not cancer research, but the meeting supports, through the religious education and the homelessness committee and the grade patrol and all the work that is done by the different committees of the meeting. And it's work that's done sort of under the guidance of the spirit, which, is also it, I wouldn't have to rely on some, cousin or uncle who might decline the responsibility after I'm, not in a position to do anything about it. Like, I know the meeting is going to use that money for for a good purpose. And I'm not going to have to say, oh, well, gosh. And I mean, it's not as if please, Grant and the other people there, don't get your hopes up, because unfortunately my career has been spent in nonprofit, which is, as advertised, nonprofit. And so, I mean, I don't have loads of money to be giving, but I just think this is one thing that, it might be interesting for the committee to, I don't know, point out to people potentially, if you're giving to the meeting, you're sustaining not just the meeting, but the type of work that will be done by the Quaker community, the people who are going to join together and make these collective decisions. And I just, like, that makes it a little bit easier for me to think about, if I had money, if I ever win the lottery, friends meeting in Washington, you're looking good, okay? But I think that people who have money to give, that might appeal to them. So that's all I want to say.
Well, I'm sorry. There, it is not unreasonable to give a gift, let's say, to the friends, but also to a college, for example, with some strings attached. Not 20 pages of gobbledygook, but for example, I've client of mine went to Harvard. Harvard was important to him. We said you can leave X dollars to Harvard, but not just in some giant fund. It had to be used for, in this case, economics research. And to go to your point and say, look, I'm leaving to friends. I want at least half of it to be used for the food bank, or, things that are more important to you than others. You don't have to give a blind gift. You can give a gift with some reasonable strings attached that fulfill your objectives, but doesn't hamstring friends from doing, okay, she wanted a food bank, we don't really do our own food bank, we give it to the so-and-so food bank, we'll make sure, et cetera, et cetera.
But if you trust the meeting's judgment, it would also, it could work for you to just give the money without.
Right, absolutely true. If you feel that they are a good steward for the, I take the view that anyone who's worked hard in their life, whether it's for a nonprofit or otherwise, I think the notion that you've accumulated $5,000. Now, the world we live in, nobody gasps at that number, but $5,000 is your legacy, and you don't want it just pissed away, right? So you can say, I'm doing it with friends, and they'll do the right thing.
I've got a question. If that answered her comment, it's a totally different. I'm a writer. I have a literary agent. I'm a published poet. I have a couple of books that books out. I'm working on another book now. It's a nonfiction book. It's in memoir. It's just speaking for me personally. It's the best thing I've ever written. So, two questions. One is, if I get hit by a bus next week and there's enough of any given collection of poems or a memoir for my literary agent to try to move ahead with it and do something with it, does it make any sense to assign like some quality or property of literary caretaker or literary agent. Like say, for example, I have another friend poetically, my friend Barrett, runs a poetry journal. I would trust him to send out poems I haven't sent out for publication. If I really would like just to see them out in the world after I'm dead, to do that.
Absolutely. I've
The
written,
same thing is true of my literary agent with the manuscript. So like, how does that work?
you can create within a will a literary executor or an art executor. I've done work for artists who don't want, they've done 50 paintings, 100 paintings. They've sold a couple, but they don't know what the, the rest of the collection worth. So in your case, you have a friend, a fellow poet you trust, you could make in the will that he is your literary executor. We can make very clear he has the right to pursue publication, assign your copyright, all those things. You can do that in will. He or she would not necessarily be the quote executor of the will, but he'd be the executor of your literary properties. And that, it's a very good idea because most estates are done and over in less than a year. But your literary works may have hopefully a 30-year horizon or more.
It's not that I have any particular scenario of like, where they might go or how many people they might appeal to. I just would like to see them live if they can.
And let me add,
And I would trust certain people
to do that. But you might also, just to finish the thought, name your friend, he's a literary executor, and you also leave him $20,000, a number, to pay for some of the costs that will be involved in doing it. So you're not leaving him the literary work.
Got it.
Okay? Yeah, but that's very doable.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I see that Bill Foskett has a question. Unmute yourself, Bill.
There we go. Several things come to my mind. One is at least a practical issue for me. Finding someone to help is a practical problem. I need to solve that. Number two, my TIA financial advisor advised me that I should probably create a trust. So I went online and looked this up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but haven't done it yet. And obviously I need help with that, but in general, I don't know where to turn specifically. And in particular, I'm not sure that what I learned online from various reputable sources about trust, I don't think I understand it. The third thing on my mind is kind of another one of those arcane questions. I'm a retired federal employee and have some sort of federal pension, and I recall at the process of going through retirement, one of the officials involved was very careful and earnest to remind me that, as I understood it at the time, disposition of whatever might remain untapped in that particular fund would not be covered by a will, that I had to do certain allocations. I did not do those at the time, and I have not done them since. I know that these are things I need to take care of, and I think in my case, I've been pretty earnest about wanting to give. When I retired, I talked with my sister who has a very different perspective on things, a very fundamentalist sort of evangelical perspective, and we talked about giving. I said, "Well, what do you, David, do?" And she basically said, "Well, we tithe." That would have amounted for them at that time pretty significant amount of money, and applied to myself, it yielded a figure. And so I set about trying to figure out how to give that away now, essentially my excess income. And I haven't succeeded at that. I set up a donor advised fund via TIAA, which they subsequently spun off. And I've used that some. But I guess if I were to ask you to focus on a question, I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the trust idea.
Well, a trust has limited but important advantages. The trust is not an estate, so it could last forever. You could have a trust that goes on 50 years after your death or beyond. Thank you. So the trust, what they're sold on, if you went to any estate planning seminar, is you avoid probate. Set up a trust, you avoid probate. But probate is not a big deal, in my opinion. And that shouldn't be the reason, because a trust, while you're alive, if you're your own beneficiary, you can do lots of things with the trust. And then upon your death, the trust becomes irrevocable and lasts, for the benefit of whoever you name, whether it's charities, whether it's individuals, so forth. But I think your questions sort of point out some of what I addressed earlier, which was hard questions. Do you give stuff away while you're around? Sort of the equivalent of tithing that your sister does for her church or group. How do you tackle these problems? And there's no magic to it. You just need someone who walks you through the different options, I believe. And does it in a way that you don't feel spoken down to or condescended, or you hear jargon that doesn't make any sense. So I think what you need to focus on is your own priorities. Forget whether it's a trust or will or a power of attorney. You say, look, I'm making up number, $1 million. I need 750 to live on. I want the other 250 to be given to these people with these objectives. How do I make that happen without spending the rest of my life signing papers? I think I work backwards. What's important to you? Who are the people that are important to you? Who are the charities that are important to you? How do you get all that done without A, spending buckets of money, and B, feeling that you know what you're doing?
Could I suggest, Bill, that the first part of your question was, how do I get advice on how to do that? And the answer is, you find somebody you trust. And how do I do that? Well, you talk to friends, you use your gut to make a decision, but to do it. And the key is, and I have seen recently somebody who was in a position where they had a will that they made a long time ago, and it was not relevant to the times, and they kept putting it off to their detriment and to their spouses and their children's detriment. So in your case, the detriment may not be to a spouse or children, but it may be to your vision of what you want to go on after, that lives after you, that speaks to your life. And I do really think that one of the pieces one of the reasons for holding these seminars is to address the Baker value of let your life speak. And part of that speaking, not the only thing, but part of that speaking is estate planning and how you want your life, the remnants of your life, the assets of your life to speak for you after you're gone. And I think that's really important. And so find somebody you trust. I have to say, and I have an incentive, obviously, I work with Jim, but his approach is the one that he's not looking at it just as a lawyer filling out the forms. There's a much more of the counseling and advice part. than there is the forms. The forms are the product of the advice. And so find somebody like that. Okay?
Yeah, thanks. You may hear from me.
What?
Sure.
Okay, good.
Another sort of question, actually, and this is a question I think that probably would involve almost anyone. From my experience with our parents' retirement, and from what I've seen is via my involvement with Prince House retirement community, there's some uncertainty involved financially in your future, introduced mainly by medical care costs that are not covered by insurance. And one of the things that's crossed my mind is, wow, on the one hand, my financial advisor says, "Oh, gee, Bill, you're going to be in good shape at least till you're 96." And will I reach 96? Well, I'm on my way. But do you have any comments on that uncertainty? Medical expenses could easily wipe out an enormous portion of what I might have if they were uninsured. But on the other hand, they might not, or those resources might grow. And sometimes I say, gee, what's the point if by the time my sister and I, my parents had passed, uh, there was a very small amount of money, and we had made a very explicit decision that we would devote my parents' estate to their care rather than to ourselves. And we're still comfortable with having made that decision.
I've always said that financial planning would be much simpler if you knew the exact date of your death.
Yeah.
We don't, you have a.
Well, I think of it's called the King Lear syndrome. If you remember your Shakespeare play, he gives away his kingdom to his daughters, and then things take the wrong direction, and he's wandering around the wilderness impoverished, and only one of the daughters is willing to help him. So I don't think, if you were meeting with me and you said, I'm concerned that, I may run out of money, if I live forever, or the government's rules about, Medicare or whatever change. And I think you have a duty to yourself not to put yourself in a position where you bankrupt yourself or impoverish yourself. So you need to think through, with help, what are the circumstances under which you would feel reasonably comfortable that you were covered and you have something extra to give away during your lifetime. The safest bet, obviously, is to give away nothing during your lifetime. Wait till you're dead. If there's something left over, it goes to whomever you designated. But I do think it's a real issue, given that we talked a little earlier, people are living very long. I had a client who was very successful financially. He retired at 70. He thought, I'll live 10 years, got plenty of money. He lived 25 more years, and he literally ran out of money because he had budgeted himself over a 10-year time frame rather than a 25-year time frame. So the lesson to be learned is take care of yourself. Don't ever feel that you put your own safety, health, well-being in jeopardy. But if you can get comfortable with that, then you can do some things in your life. Not more, as I said a moment ago, you don't do anything. You wait till the clock hits midnight, and then whatever's left over is available to, donate, give away, whatever.
And the other way to do that, in my opinion, is to talk with somebody. You can't do it alone. You need a set of eyes, and other minds helping you ask the questions and helping you work that through.
I would suggest on that we close and with great thanks. Very helpful and very structured exactly correctly. That it's not the documents are not the hard part. The thinking ahead and decisions is, and that the longer you put it off, the stupider you are.
I'm not sure it's stupider, it just becomes, it's like any task that you do, this is not directly, I had a client come in one day and say, Jim, I haven't filed tax returns for 13 years. And I said, why? I mean, he was a colonel in the Air Force,
Right.
so he wasn't so vagabond. And he said, well, the first year I just was late, getting my stuff together. So I didn't want to file it until I had everything, and then it became the second year, so forth. And I filed the second year, they said, where's the first year, and on and on. And then it got to 13 years, and he then got the letter from the IRS, why am I involved for 13 years? So my point is,
He applied a security clearance. I was amazed as security officer.
Right.
Didn't notice the hadn't filed.
but my point for, she's 100% right, but my point for this thing is, and I said it earlier, get it done 94% correct. Don't drive yourself crazy because you can change them. You're not stuck with them. It's not like you make an irrevocable choice and go, what was I thinking? You can do it now, get it right, and if your world changes in the next 2 weeks or 2 years, you tweak them.
How often do you think people should go back and re-examine?
I have a little funny rule. I say, read your will, your friend has a copy, every January 1st. There's no logic to that. It's just they,
Dates, remember.
and they read it, they look at it, and I just get a bunch of calls every year, January 2nd, 3rd, 4th. Jim, I read it over the weekend. I don't think it works anymore. I'm not getting along with my sister, and I named her as the guardian for my kids and so forth. I want to change. But that would answer your question. I think once a year, you just read it again to say, does this still fit my life? Have things developed? Has stuff gone good or bad? Cause me to do it different.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, well, many thanks, and we have coming up a speaker is going to sort of talk about organizing your life as you live in a way to make death a natural part of it, and in terms of friendships and charity and all those kind of things. So this fits in very well. I'm very grateful for you to take the time to be with us and share your wisdom. So thank you.
Sure, I enjoyed it.
Great.